Thank you. So before we start, first just want to welcome everybody. Can't believe that it's February and it's a spring semester already, but it is, and that's freaky. But just have a couple of quick announcements. One, now that we're in spring semester and in February, graduation is coming pretty quickly. So if you are graduating this semester, if you're a member of the Order of Sword and Shield and you want the gold and blue honor cords, make sure you order them early because they do get sold out. If you are a member of the military, active or veteran, please let us know because you will get red, white, and blue honor cords that you can wear at commencement. Some of you may have heard because we were just talking about this, but thanks to the amazing paperwork skills and organization of JD, I'm really excited to announce that we have submitted the paperwork for our student IAEM chapter to be Penn State official. Once we get the signed paperwork from Penn State, which actually we got in right under the wire because the window closed yesterday, and we submitted it like 3 days ago. Once we get that signed paper from Penn State, then we have the appropriate number of students and we can go to IAEM and we can be IAEM official. So hopefully there will be another announcement coming very shortly for that. We do have another student chapter meeting coming up in a few weeks, but JD will be sending an email out with the time and all of that information. Our next public health preparedness webinar is going to be March 1st, and the speaker is going to be somebody who I went through my PhD program with. He has focused his career, so we went through the biodefense program, and he is going to be speaking about his experiences speaking at the bioweapons convention, which he just did a few months ago. So that'll be a really, really interesting thing to hear about. With it being February, the registration for summer session is also coming pretty quickly. So I will be teaching 410 as usual, and tomorrow morning, Dr. Langridge and I are having a meeting about an elective that deals with the intersection of emergency management and public health. It's a course that we're really, really excited about, so you will be seeing more of that soon, but I know registration does come pretty quickly, probably in maybe the next week or so, I think. So just keep that in mind. You will be seeing more information on that. And last announcement is we are going to be opening the school store soon. It kind of takes a while to get your stuff, and people who are graduating typically want it before they graduate. So we will be opening it up soon. Look on our LinkedIn page and look for an email probably from Rachel Rager or JC, and they will have the link and all of the information. So I'm going to introduce our speaker in one quick second, but this is going to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute and you can ask it yourself, or I will be monitoring the chat so I can read a question or Christie can read a question either way. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Christie St. Clair, she's the Chief of Coast Guard Organizational Communication, and I met her. I was doing my office at Coast Guard headquarters did this really great training initiative up at the Coast Guard Academy, and it was the first time we had ever done anything like that, and it had Coast Guard-wide implications. So we wanted to kind of brag about it a little bit and talk about these great cadets that were all trained up, graduating, going out into the field with their chem bio rad nuke training. And I got in touch with Christie, and I knew I wanted to do something, but I had this thought in my head, and Christie took it was a couple minutes, and she was like asking me these questions that I would have never thought of. And I got off the phone with her with a totally different idea, and I was so excited. And it was really great to see kind of like how her brain worked through that. So she created and leads the Coast Guard's first internal communications office. So a lot of her work deals with ensuring Coast Guard members, civilians, retirees, veterans, and families have news and resource to be mission ready. And she's done a lot with communication plans, social media campaigns, and strategic messaging. And she has a pretty small team, but they manage an internal Coast Guard news site called U.S.C.G, which is really helpful for members of the Coast Guard and people who work for the Coast Guard. So she's been involved with Coast Guard's COVID-19 communications team. She was oversaw the creation of the COVID response website, and she did a lot with COVID communication, which again, I thought would be really interesting for us to hear about. And a lot of the work that she's done has had really tangible results. So she was able to boost unit cybersecurity incident reporting by 20%. Now a lot more of us are using Microsoft Teams, and also military women retention has been a huge push in the Coast Guard, and she's been able to have a positive impact on that as well. And one more thing that I want to highlight before I turn the floor over to her, as opposed to me talking about what she does, she can talk about what she does. But she created an international nonprofit during the 2017 hurricane season. And she was organizing social media volunteers, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that. But it is an emergency management nonprofit that is looking for volunteers. So any of our EM students who are looking for some practical experience to help with their certification process, Christie is the person you want to talk to. So thank you again so much for giving up your Wednesday night and talking to us about communication and government hiring.
Hi guys, it's good to see you all tonight. Thanks to everybody who was kind enough to me to turn on your video cameras. I am very uncomfortable public speaking. I dislike it greatly. So anytime I can actually look at humans, it's great. If you can't, I understand. I also have often joined meetings and not turned on my cameras because of the chaos going around me or a million other situations. So I get it, but I appreciate being able to see people's eyes. So yeah, I'm Christie Sinclair. I currently work at the Coast Guard, and my first experience with emergency management health communications was actually prior to coming to the Coast Guard. I had been at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and I got a call. I was a press officer, so press officers, a normal day is you go in and you get questions from representatives from the media, from journalists, and you either answer them by phone or you seek the answers out, and then you get them cleared by the SMEs, and then you push them back out, and then it's very, very formulaic. But we also did some really fun stuff like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Paris Climate Accords. So that was my daily mix. And then one morning I got a call from my boss, and she said, so there's been an incident, and there's been this is completely out of the blue. I think I had maybe gotten off the metro to go into my office, and she said there was a river in California that was impacted by something that the EPA had done. There was a spill from a mine, and the administrator's team was very concerned about how this response was going to be going for a lot of reasons. And would I please go out and work this emergency response as the PIO? I had never done any PIO training, none. I don't know why they name requested me. The administrator's press secretary, Melissa Harrison at the time, had requested that I go, and so I had no idea what to expect. We got on the plane. She had never done an emergency response either. Her background was political communications for the candidates, the presidential candidates. And she turned to me in the seat on the way out, and she said, I have no idea what is about to happen, but I can promise you it will not be boring. So she was right. That was actually where I first learned about altitude sickness. It's where I first got to ride a Texas Longhorn steer named Blizzard, who gives hugs I am not kidding. He gives hugs. Um, I maybe have you covered CISM yet?
I don't know if we've formally covered it, but I know that there are people who have professional experience with it.
Okay, great. So um, if you are at an emergency response, when you're at an emergency response, very frequently the stress level is extremely high, the sleep level is extremely low, nutrition low. We would high five each other when we had a chance to actually go to the ladies' room once during the day. We were very excited about that. So CISM is critical incident something, something. Somebody here probably will actually.
I think it's critical incident stress management.
Yes, thank you. And frequently it's organized and intentional. This was not organized, but the rodeo was next door and they really, really wanted to help. So the cowboy and cowgirl brought over their Texas Longhorn steer. So like we were in this community, we were embedded in this community, hanging out with the rodeo people, and taking off our EPA jackets while we were going out. If we had an opportunity to get outside the EOC, because everybody hated us. They hated us. Okay, hate is a really strong word. I really do mean that. The EPA was responsible for causing this mine spill into the Animas River. It's 2005-ish, I think, 2007-ish. Somebody's probably going to Google it and look it up for us. I think JD's already on it. So the pieces that I am able to talk about are that during a typical exploration of a mine that had been plugged, that was leaking, different types of minerals, solids. The groundwater rose up, especially during the spring, and would leak all these toxic chemicals into the Animas River and the surrounding areas. It was not the only mine doing that. There are a lot of mines doing that. And the community loves the Animas River. This is Durango. They love the Animas River. People will commute to their jobs on rafts. They, on the weekends, just form chains of rafts that people hang out. They love the Animas River. We turn the Animas River yellow. I think, thank you, JD. You turned it yellow, their beloved river. And on the flight out there, speaking of the press secretary, we were talking about those comms challenges because you have a very beloved river. We were the responsible party. More on that if anybody's interested. They couldn't sue us, which is probably a really good thing, but everybody hated us and they loved their river and we made it yellow. And we couldn't talk about water quality in the Animas River. We didn't feel like, as the responsible party, we could start excusing the water quality levels because the water already was terrible. I learned while I was out there that sometimes the water is blue, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's pink. It changes based on what's leaking out of those old mines in the mountains. But nobody wanted to listen to that. There's no way we could have talked about that well. Downriver, the Animas River crosses through several states, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, I think. I'm sure JD will tell us in a second. There's one other one too, starts with an M. Especially toward the lower basin, the lower section of the Animas River, it's used as irrigation for crops, and it's used as drinking water for Native American tribes who live alongside it. So they also were less than pleased with us. In addition to considering the river a very sacred part of their faith and their livelihood and their everyday experience. It's a sacred river, and the EPA killed it and we turned to yellow. And so that's what we arrived at. And we never really got to a good way of handling that. In fact, so I've sent Jen a booklet, which I worked on at the Coast Guard. It's the Commander's Guide to Communication Planning. And I think it's really, really useful for anybody in emergency management leadership to take a look at it. The content, even though I wrote it, the content actually came from the previous public affairs director at the Coast Guard, Captain Howard Wright, now retired. So it's all his brain, but my words. And it really talks about the impact that comms has on maintaining operational freedom of action when you're responding to a crisis or an emergency. And one of the things I think that is so brilliant about what he writes about is how it really starts before the response. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. Who's going to post it on LinkedIn and share it with the faculty members to post in classes. And one of the things that Captain Wright, who will always be captain to me, talked about was that it's a phased process. And if we use the Gold King mine as an example, I think it's a great example of all the things that you don't want to do. So the step, if you can imagine it as a step ladder, the basic functionality of communications during an emergency or for an emergency response community is first to inform the public, give them the basic information they need. Once you have that established, then you can start building trust, affinity, and advocacy. Then if you have that, then you can really, if you're really connected with your community and you know what they care about, and there's a two-way back and forth communication, you can start to really truly understand what risks are present during an emergency. And if you understand those risks and what's going on, you have trust and support from the community, they support you and they know what's going on, you will be able to do the things that you need to do as part of the response. I'm sure that Jen, with a much longer experience with the Coast Guard, has worked a lot of events that involved some piece of those elements not being present. And I think when you have a stool that has a few legs and you don't have one of them, you'll crash down. If you have managed to keep everything solid and firm, and you have public knows what's going on, they trust you, they care about what you're doing, they feel connected to your mission. You've managed all the risks, you're doing exactly what you need to do to operate. Then you find yourself in a place where you can actually shape the strategic environment you're in. You can help drive the conversation rather than having the conversation drive you. So I guess an example to poke fun at the Coast Guard, not poke fun, it's a terrible, but an example of not being able to maintain operational freedom of action was the Deepwater Horizon incident. Sorry, Jen.
I was just going to use that as an example, actually. It's like you read my mind.
Yeah, it's classic. They had celebrity actors' siblings using it as an opportunity to sell their oil. They had a warehouse where they started housing all of the crazy contraptions that people started sending the Coast Guard to help. What we were doing was apparently working just fine, but the way that we had managed the comms around the response was not working. And so nobody trusted us. And so even though it actually was getting in the way of the response. And Jenna, if you're, maybe that's something that you've already tested, so I don't want to.
No. The one example, I was actually just having this conversation with somebody a few days ago. So I believe the explosion happened, it happened on Earth Day. So I don't remember when exactly we were able to cap the well, but this was a long response. I think I mobilized sometime in end of May, early June, and I stayed on until November. I was just up in DC. But one problem that we had going along with the communications thing is, so started in April, you're getting into May, June, July. Admiral Allen, who I think is amazing, called it a leadership laboratory. We were doing something that had never been done before. There had never been a release of oil, a continual release of oil like this ever. So we were really in uncharted territory. We had people on the beaches cleaning, but there was more oil coming in. And time of the year is significant because, again, it's like May, June, July, August on the Gulf Coast. Coasties are working long hours. They're wearing PPE so that way they're not affected by the oil. So Coast Guard is really good about taking care of their people, and we're not going to put people in danger where we're going to have them passing out from the heat. So we meaning big Coast Guard, not me, instituted strict work rest cycles, which made sense. It's hot. People are working hard. They're in PPE. We don't want them to get hurt. That ended up getting turned around, and I was on the National Incident Command staff, and we started getting reports of posts on LinkedIn, posts on classified ads, that people were paying a couple $100s for pictures of coasties sleeping or resting because they obviously were not doing what they were there to do, and taxpayer money was there for people to sleep and rest. So, we're trying to do the right thing, making sure that we're cleaning up as much oil as we can, trying to do the right thing, taking care of our people. And there was so much, the tensions were super high. The messages were getting diluted as they got further down in the community. And we ended up having to justify why we were giving people rest time in the middle of the summer in PPE on the Gulf Coast. So it was just a crazy experience. And another example of that like weird communication world is I was like an O2 at the time, and a captain asked me a question about how much oil we had cleaned up. So I was getting all the reports in, we were packaging it up, and we were sending it up to the secretary in the White House and everything like that. So we were working with numbers all the time. So one of the questions was, how much oil was cleaned up? And we were looking at it with him, and I said, truthfully, Captain, I don't know what to tell you as the best answer. Because if I tell you that we had coasties out and they cleaned a mile of beach, some people are going to expect a mile of beach to be fully cleaned. But, if they cleaned a mile of beach and then the oil came back in and then they cleaned that mile of beach again, they cleaned 2 miles worth of beach, but there's not 2 clean miles. So if you go to the governor and say, our coasties cleaned 1,000 miles, and they go outside and they're like, no, you didn't. So we were really thinking about every metric that we had and how to explain everything we said so nothing would get misunderstood, miscommunicated. And part of the thing was, obviously we wanted accurate reporting, but also it was because we wanted to maintain that trust with the state officials. We were working as hard as we could. We didn't want the beaches to be dirty either. The governors didn't want their beaches to be dirty. But even things as simple as, well, how much oil did the Coast Guard clean up last week, was like this whole game of chess almost, because you wanted to make sure that you gave the correct answer, but you also wanted to make sure that they understood exactly what you meant. So our admirals were like, I remember we went through like, that was supposed to be a quick question, and it ended up being this whole long, like, here's what we're talking about. I don't know how to best present it, but let's take a step back before we answer this seemingly simple question.
It's not simple, because the other piece of things is that you're explaining things that are very, very complicated to people who have very, very, very little technical knowledge of the subject matter. At the Animas River, people would ask us if the water quality is getting better. Well, actually, no, because it's spring and there's normal runoff, and during normal runoff in Colorado, the water quality decreases. There's not really a whole lot of fish living in the Animas River. So we hamstrung ourselves, I think, in that response by not talking about the water quality in ways that we were qualified to do. If we had not been the responsible party, we would have come in with a lot more trust. But because we were the responsible party, looking back on it, I think that we should have turned response over. This was actually, Jen, the first time I met a Coast Guard member, because the thing was so badly being managed by all the participants in the EOC, that we brought in a Coast Guard member to run the response for us. And once the Coasties showed up, everything started working better. It was really tremendous. I said this actually during my job interview with the Coast Guard, Jen, that when the Coasties showed up, everything, the stress level just came down because they had a system that managed everything. And suddenly everybody knew what to do. And that still couldn't stop us from getting out of our way. We sent the Navajo water trucks to replace the animus water that they had been drinking. I still don't know how this happened, but even though it was perfectly clean, pristine, beautiful water, I would feed it to my grandmother. On the side of the truck, it said non-potable water. We had problems and we just couldn't get out of our own way all the way through it. So anyway, that was my experience. After that, I started realizing that you can't send inexperienced people like me to crises like that. Then it was a leadership job, I guess. It's a great word. I like that. So after that, I wrote the EPA's PIO guide for emergency response management. I called all of our most experienced PIOs, asked them, like, if I was going to a response again tomorrow, what do I need to know? And so I basically wanted to have our experts like in my back pocket, so I could just pull out the guide and be able to work from that as my step-by-step guide. So it's very informal language, very real. And I also obviously did all the FEMA training and got all the certs and all of that. And realized that, anyway, so I eventually moved over to the Coast Guard, where they don't let civilians do any real emergency response work at all, until COVID. And then I was really not happy, but everybody during COVID talked about how they couldn't go to work. They were watching TV, they were binging TV. And I had no frame of reference because I stayed up until 2 a.m. at headquarters writing frequently asked questions because I wanted to get the website up the next day. So thinking back to that,
just as a little side note for the non-coasties here, we had obviously official pages that had all of our like our planning orders and all that kind of stuff, and that was run by our Office of Emergency Management. And then we also had a great just like a COVID information deposit or repository, I guess. I mean, you had a ton of stuff on there. And that was for everybody. That was for a coastie who had a question about like basic COVID stuff. It was for a family member that wanted some information. So that was an amazing resource. And one thing I want to like pick your brain about is, so now across the country, COVID vaccine is like really contentious. You know, there were obviously a lot of opinions across the board. In the military, it became mandatory for a while. And so at the beginning, at least in my experience, there was a big emphasis on getting people to understand that it was safe and more encouraging. And then encouraging people to get it. And it was this is probably going to be a thing, so go ahead and get it. And then it kind of like the heat kind of turned up a little bit. And then it was, all right, by this date, you need to get your first shot. And by this date, you need your second shot, or else you're going to start getting, in the Coast Guard, at least we call them page 7s, which is like a negative thing. Well, it can be negative. There are also neutral ones.
I never hear them being called positive, except when I want to say something nice to somebody and they're like, oh, do a page 7, and everybody cringes.
Yeah. So what ended up happening for a while is if you did not get your shot by a certain date, you would get a negative page 7. And then then they like really dropped the hammer, and if you did not get it, then you were violating a direct order, you were violating a superior officer, and then as everyone knows, they were discharging people. Now there are a number of lawsuits and everything. But from a communications perspective, can you kind of talk about that switch and how it went from like more, hey, this is the science, it's good, everything's safe, to like dropping the hammer, hey, you have till tomorrow or else your 17-year career is in jeopardy.
Yeah. So the reason for my cringe is the once you do something that big, that significant, and then the laws change, and then you have to undo it. So I'm sure many of you have heard that the National Defense Authorization Act included a requirement that the Department of Defense end the vaccine mandate for the armed services, including the Coast Guard. So that is my week. That is literally my week. My groceries have stopped. My fridge is empty. My mom is watching my teenager every night. My husband's making dinner. I haven't been sleeping. So you're going to see stuff probably coming up soon. I can't talk about it in detail. All of it's really obvious, I would think, what we're doing, but it's one of those things where the pace changes based on what's going on in the world. Jen, to answer your question, there wasn't a shift in, the shift wasn't driven by comms. The shift was driven by science and the chief medical officer, Rear Admiral Dana Thomas. And as the pandemic grew and the vaccines became available, and then once they got the FDA approval for the emergency use, then that turned on comms for a different topic. And so it really wasn't the comms driving, it was the comms trying to support and help explain and provide context. But yeah, that was good times. Really, none of us had any break during COVID whatsoever, and it's been going ever since. So the pandemic has been tricky. The goal for the website was something that we had never done before. We wanted to provide all the information in one single place in a hub where people could easily get it, rather than putting it on some back-end internet site. Our goal was to make sure that we were being as transparent and forthcoming as possible. While not owning the science, we don't own the science, but we do own impacts on our members' health. We own housing, we own training, and whether or not you can go to training if you have not had your vaccine. So just making sure people had all that information on a regular basis, and that it was accurate. And sometimes it would be updated in the morning and then update again in the evening. We wanted to make sure that we were extremely transparent because we wanted to maintain our operational freedom of action. I think we did okay. Our vaccination refusal rates were about similar to the other services. Were a lot smaller, so it probably had greater impact on us than it had on other services. It is still a hard topic to talk about when you have people who have refused to get the vaccine, and they're no longer part of the service. And you've been working alongside somebody for so long, and then you have to say goodbye to them, and it's not been easy. I think I'm a civilian in headquarters, so I don't experience that much of it. But even as a listener, because we're constantly listening to what's going on, it's really hard. I think people are pretty traumatized. So just as a question, how would you all message that if the DoD then decides, okay, all of this has happened, but we are going to follow the law. So the vaccine mandate has been rescised, canceled. How would you message that to people in a way that would maintain your operational freedom of action, transparency, and trust. Even just some general like principles that you would try and navigate as you thread that needle. What do you think are some of the questions that you'd have to work through?
I think a lot of people would be asking why the change. Did the science change? Was there evidence of concern about the vaccination process? Was this sort of scientific change or a political change in the process? And if you did receive the vaccine already, are there concerns about that? I think there's a lot of sort of disinformation out in social media, et cetera, right now. So reinforcing safety and those kind of things, I think, would be important.
Yeah, it's tricky because as a federal agency, we have to follow both science and the law. We don't own science or the law. Like we don't, in Coast Guard Public Affairs, if you own it or you did it, you can talk about it. But we don't own it, we don't do it. So we certainly are never going to find ourselves in the position of disobeying a lawful change in federal law. We were directed by Congress, signed into law by the president. So that is what we are going to do. And so getting into the science of it, I think that would be a rabbit hole that we wouldn't go down, because that would end up back to the military criticizing the government, Congress specifically. And Congress really is responsible for paying us, setting our budget. Yeah, we have to follow the law, and the laws are as good as the people who make them. And people elect who they choose to elect, and then we work from there. So now we're in the process of unraveling all of those changes that we made, and all the trickle down effects. So that website that we built over months and months and months, we're not unbuilding it, but we're updating it to make sure that everything is still accurate. I think
one thing about the science. Oh, sorry, Christie.
No, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, we have a professor here at Penn State who Dr. Langrich and I were working with on a COVID project maybe 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago. And he said something that has like stuck with me ever since he said it. And he said that, we are so used to science being, he said it more eloquently than I'm going to, but we're used to science being static. There's so much that we already know. And especially, I know that there are scientific discoveries all the time, but the stuff that affects us like on our day-to-day life, it pretty much doesn't change. Like there's a lot that, you can know is going to be the same today, tomorrow, next week. And so we're not really used to something like COVID that is, we're learning more about every time you turn on the news, and it's something that's evolving so quickly. So part of the reason people were so, like, I don't want to say resistant to the science, is because the science, which they're used to being the same, was changing. So when people were talking about, evolving guidelines and following the science, it was no, you're flip-flopping. And so it was hard to, if you're not like in that world and you don't really understand, then you don't fully get that, no, the science is changing, because this is something that we've never had to deal with before.
Yeah. I don't know when they did it, but the EPA's websites have started to change the headlines to what we currently know about ... whatever topic it is. And I think that's smart. I think in the scientific community, there has been a desire to, say science has the information that we need and we should trust the science, but we don't then talk about how it evolves over time through the scientific method and, getting more information. And that's hard. It's really hard to educate a lot of people very quickly on a very technical topic. So I think right away, there's there's issues there. And then also socio-cultural, political tides that are shifting, education and interest in science, just as in K through 12 schools is decreasing. So that is not my area. I've been swimming in it for the past few years, but it's not really my area. But we did the COVID response. We handled it like an emergency response. That might be kind of interesting. For the comms, we handled the comms as if it was an emergency response. So we had essentially a PIO. We had a public information shop. We had public affairs staff working through the ICS structure. And it worked really effectively. I think it's a great example of how you can scale ICS to anything. And I saw a question earlier about internal, external audiences. ICS also really works for internal crises too. We've recently used the ICS structure for a few different things at the Coast Guard. A new financial management system that didn't work very well when it first started. We used the ICS structure for that. I was the PIO for that. And it was hard, Jen, convincing all the leadership there that the PIO role was exactly the same for internal audiences as it's external. Because it's not about the tactics, it's about who you need to talk to, what they need to know, what they need to do. It's the same exact work that we do versus internal versus external. It's just different people, different needs, different tools. Is this interesting or useful to you guys? Like, I don't know what your experience with the information side of emergency management has been. I'm curious to find out, like, is it something that you find curious or something that you find intimidating to talk to members of the news media?
One, just,
Go for it.
I think thing that I've noticed, not just in the current pandemic, but even in 2009, back in 2009, and same thing with the Ebola outbreak in 13, 15, as well as other not public health crisis. But there's this construct of a joint information system and joint information center. But I think it's one thing that we really haven't done a great job at wrapping our arms around. And we create lots of inconsistency in messaging between federal, state, local partnerships, whether that's in requirements, whether that's in advice, whether that's in how we portray the science. And again, recognizing that these are really, really big, complex events to get everybody on the same page. But it seems like there should be more of an opportunity to get on the same page. And I think that's where, at least in the pandemic, has caused even more friction, I think, with the public and distrust, because there are so many different entities that aren't necessarily on the same page.
Or working off the same set of facts. Yeah, it's challenging. Do we want to talk about crowdsourcing during emergencies? Can we?
Sure.
Can we? Do you know what crowdsourcing means? Is that a familiar concept? Jen, I don't know how you teach virtually. This is insane.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I was just going to say crowdsourcing is getting information from the public in some form.
Perfect. Love it. Thank you. Yeah, so during 2017 hurricanes, Houston got hit really, really badly. Inland, urban search and rescue. Urban SAR had not been a specialty of the Coast Guard. The 911 system got overwhelmed. They were not able to take 911 calls from people who were experiencing distress. And so everything was going out on social media, like help, help, help. And I was hanging out, I think it was a Saturday morning with some friends, just watching the news go through the problem that emergency responders were facing, that they could not gather all that social media information, but we were seeing people in real time calling for help. So in about an hour, we had created the hashtag Harvey SOS that other people started using, which was really cool. And then we geolocated the source of those needs, those incidents. If they had it, then we tagged it, we put it onto a map. Google gave us a sandbox, and we then were able to have a very interactive map that we were updating constantly. People started flooding in, volunteers across the world. So we'd have people in Australia turning on their shift for SOS checking. And then we'd get to Europe, like we'd go around the world. People jumping in, like everyday heroes who were housewives, house dads, students, master's students, professionals who would take a couple hours out of their time of their day to do something. And so we organized that work. And because of a couple of us had experience in emergency response, we knew how to get it to the responders. So I handed it off to FEMA, and they said, we can't use this. We can't trust this information. A couple of years later, they were working with us to get information about shelters during hurricanes validated before the Red Cross had even put it out, because the work of the crowdsourcing volunteers was so effective and efficient, and we developed a reputation for validating our data that they could really truly rely on it. And the city of Houston actually tweeted a thank you to us, which I think was one of the coolest things I've experienced. And the group still exists. They're still out there. They are a nonprofit. I do not have the bandwidth to do much. Occasionally I serve on the board and I mentor the president, the executive director, just informally, but they need help. So if this is something that you're interested in, they have a lot of people doing a lot of different pieces of this work before the emergency response starts, so that when the response happens, they're ready to go. They're putting together like an app so that anywhere you are in the country, if you're traveling or a friend needs help, you can plug in your location and what you need, and then you'll get the emergency response information that you need. So not just the 911 services, but mental health support. I can't remember the whole gamut. They've found a way to artificial intelligence gather all this information and put it into an app, so it'll be seamless from the perspective of the user. So really, really cool work. And they're doing neat work with imagery of events, flooding events, fires, the fire mapping. They have a fire mapping app. It's remarkable. And that, I think one of the neat things is they help people see the impact of an emergency response and visualize it. Emergency responders can't take the time to create interactive maps, but they can, with the help of the crowdsourcers, help communicate to the public the scope and magnitude of what the response is that they're working on. So it's something I feel really passionate about, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
If you could send me like the information, POCs and everything like that, I can share that on our LinkedIn page again. And that way any students that are interested can contact either you or them directly, however you want.
Yeah, I wouldn't have, I mean, anybody's welcome to contact me directly to follow up questions or anything like that. USA Jobs guidance, but yeah, for volunteering, I would just go straight to Cedar, because they'll know how to work with you.
Perfect.
But that's a great idea, Jen. I will do that.
How do you,
Yeah, thanks.
how do you get the geolocation of your crowdsourcing? Is that through their accounts? I mean,
No.
where's that data coming from?
It's a really good question. Thankfully, I am not one of the technical people. So, and also the nature of the mission has shifted over time. We started based on an acute need. And so we were not concerned about privacy. We were not concerned about legality. We were just like this renegade little bunch of folks trying to save lives. And so that's matured, obviously, as the organization's gone on. At the time, we were primarily using Twitter because that's where the SOS traffic was the heaviest. And we had a group of volunteers who would take the information that was provided and then reach out to confirm that it was still valid. So they would direct message the people that were involved, or they would try and contact them if there was a cell phone number or something like that. So we never took information without validating it first. But no, there was not geotagged information within social media that we had access to. Like I said, that's a really fascinating evolution of where technology could go, but the privacy concerns are also a bit of a concern. It was neat to hear stories of our volunteers being on the phone with people. There was a grandmother, the water was coming up to her dresser. She climbed onto her dresser and she was texting or talking with our volunteer. And then the Coast Guard showed up because they were following the address that we had provided. And sometimes it was the Coast Guard, sometimes it was private volunteers out in boats. And there's nothing like seeing the impact that we can really have in people's lives.
This is not an advertisement for the Coast Guard, but obviously if anybody is interested in pursuing a career in the Coast Guard, you can talk to Christie or talk to me. Be more than happy to help set you up.
I love my job. It's really great. U.S.C.G.
I know. Yes, I was gonna say, I know it's almost 9 o'clock, but could you spend a couple minutes talking about that if nobody had any other crowdsourcing questions?
Or any questions whatsoever. Like, I've been doing this for 20 or 30 years and I've seen it from all different angles and lots of different ways. So I'm glad to answer anything that's kind of on your mind or you're thinking about it. JD, I can see something buzzing in your brain.
Well, I mean, you had started this talk with going into a place where people hated you. How do you go into a place like that? No one wants to talk to you. No one wants to work with you. How do you turn that around?
If you are able to find that out, please let me know. Because, the tide also includes political needs. And there were a lot of tides. We did not have the relationships in place when we got there that we needed to have had built up. The community relations did not exist to the level that we needed to. It wasn't, they did not feel invested in our success. There was a lot of distrust already. Some of it predated the EPA, especially concerning the Navajo. I mean, there's no way that we can counterbalance distrust that goes centuries. Transparency, honesty, humanizing the situation, behind the scenes, introducing people to the scientists doing the work, taking them out with you on the work, doing ride-alongs, doing tours. It is very hard to earn trust when you're an outsider, extremely hard. But I think that one of the ways we started turning it around was when we were able to get the go-ahead from our safety officer to let some members of the media go up to the mine site so they could see what had happened and really started to visualize it. That really helped. Sending the media out and members of the community out to go do water testing with the scientists. That really helped, so they could see the granularity of the information and they had some more trust. We also provided more data on a more frequent basis, in a more real-time basis than we had for any response. There was a Gold King Mine website where we updated the data, preliminary data, aggregated data, so much data. We would post like the preliminary initial findings, and then once it was validated by labs, external labs, like a month later, 3 weeks later, we would update the data. And it was penance, really, I think, for having lost everybody's trust. But we would provide, like, I think 36 testing sites up and down the Animas River. and 20 or 30 different substance levels. And we just gave them everything that we could possibly do as a way to kind of get back some trust, some level of trust.
You good, JD? Do you want to talk about USA Jobs a little bit and your perspective as a federal government hiring manager?
Yes, we're off the record, right?
It is being recorded. Do you want me to, you want me to stop?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Oh.
I'm being facetious mostly. USA Jobs is a beautiful system. The federal hiring process is not a beautiful system. There are some tricks and tips. One is your resume can be as long as you would like it to be. It does not need to be 2 pages front and back. Be specific. There are people who you can pay $700, $1,000 to who will make you a fed version of a resume, of your regular resume. It's well worth it. It is well worth it. I've done it, and then now I give my resume to people so that they can model it off of things. Use all the keywords. I am sorry, but use the keywords. As a reader of resumes, it helps if you use all caps for section headers, because the resumes that we see on our end are single spaced, tight, like 8-point type. And so the having things in all caps for subject areas like author's book author or graphic design skills or whatever you're putting in like as the header. If you have military experience, you have the opportunity to use that to get points for veterans hiring preference. If you have a disability, you can also use that as a way to be considered in a different set of resumes from the veterans versus the general public versus insiders. If there is a job opening and there are multiple listings for it, apply for every version that you are qualified for. Don't just apply for, so say you work for an agency already, apply as a member of the agency, apply as an outside member of the agency, apply as a veteran, and apply as a Schedule A hire. Apply in all the different ways, same resume, but you want to have yourself in as many of those stacks of resumes that the hiring managers are able to consider. There are pros and cons of hiring preferences for military veterans. Thank you for joining. I was recently informed that I had to hire a forklift driver in Anchorage to become my senior writer for a news website for internal audiences. And during his interview, he insulted the Coast Guard by calling us a non-traditional armed force. And his idea for everything was to issue a press release and put it on social media. I had to hire him because he had a certain level of veterans hiring preference points. So the ability to go to a different stack of resumes was essential in that case. And I was able to find somebody who was well qualified, but probably not the best qualified, to be quite blunt about it. I'm really looking forward to having him start. He's going to be fantastic, but I was not able to hire the absolute best candidates. So there's pros and cons. Apply it on as many different variations as you possibly can. Do not hesitate to reach out to the hiring manager if you know them by email. Most people will welcome that. And be patient. Expect that there will be a very long wait between when you first apply versus when you hear something versus when you get an interview offer or informed that you haven't been selected. I've applied for jobs through USA Jobs, and a year and a half later, I got the notification that I hadn't been selected. Obviously, right? But it's just very squirrely. set up job alerts. I don't know the emergency management codes, but set up a search alert within U.S.C.G jobs so that figure out what codes are appropriate for the lines of business, like lines of work that you want to do. Would suggest you not just limit it to emergency management, but also include things like program management, and probably some others. There's probably some other codes that would be useful to apply to. And set your search up for those. You can set it up by geographic area or not, and then get regular updates. Suggest that if you are actively hunting, then you really want to have daily updates. Some jobs now are open for very short periods of time. Virtual jobs, especially. We had one job that was virtual and one job that wasn't. Same pay grade, same job. The virtual job had 3 candidates. No, sorry. The in-person job had 3 candidates. Virtual had 290. So customize it to the greatest extent possible to make sure that you're searching for the kinds of jobs that you want. I think those are my main pieces of advice for USA jobs. And read the entries. A lot of the times the job will be open for only the first 50 candidates. So for those jobs that there's going to be like 200 candidates, they'll cut it off. So it's not going to be open for a week or 2 weeks. So that's why I'm saying, to get back to my train of thought, to set a daily search up. So I get daily searches for people I'm helping do job hunting for. And networking. Know in advance when a job is about to post is worth its weight in gold, because then you can have everything already set up and ready to go right from the beginning. So all the networking that you do as part of the club, that's perfect. I think that is probably 99% of the game right there. Volunteering for organizations that do emergency response and crowdsourcing can help connect you to people who are in that line of business, especially if one wanted to create a whole line of business focused on that intersection. Like there's a lot of growth in the emergency management space that I'm excited to see where it is in 5 years. Jen, it probably will look, some things are going to be very, very different.
I think you're right.
In good ways. I think there's some really
I agree
exciting
with
things
you.
happening. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more? I know we're kind of running over, but does anybody have any more specific questions, either about the communications piece or about federal resumes? And I always like Chip Lankert from FEMA, who your husband might know, but he posts a lot on LinkedIn about doing like federal resume workshops, and he posts a ton for FEMA specific stuff, but he also posts a lot for veteran opportunities. So he's always, as many of you know, a great resource for people looking for emergency management stuff. And Mark just said he was watching his webinar tonight. So always a great resource, definitely somebody to follow on LinkedIn. So any more questions for Christie?
I would absolutely encourage people to use LinkedIn actively, join groups that are connected to emergency response, emergency management, even following the organizations that are like for-profit companies that do work in this space, post really interesting content because they're trying to get eyeballs. So you can learn a ton and then make really, really unique connections from across the world. I'm not plugging LinkedIn I don't get paid for plugging LinkedIn, but to me, for emergency response, Twitter too has a really cool emergency response Twitter community. I think it's EMG Twitter or something like that as their hashtag. So connecting into the hashtags, and so you become part of the fabric of the community. Once there is an opportunity to join an emergency response somewhere that just came through Twitter, and he was inviting his Twitter community to come participate or come in and join the EOC or something. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but we're taking a tour of something. I can't remember, but there are cool things, cool opportunities out there if you're really engaged in the networking.
And I know we were talking about following different things. So obviously FEMA, I know a lot of people do, but don't forget about your state and local emergency management associations, especially if you are interested in picking up and moving, follow especially on LinkedIn, follow the state where you are now, follow the state where you want to move, follow the state where you wouldn't mind moving if something great came up, because they've always got, different states have a lot of great opportunities posted too. So I always say, like, all emergency management roads don't lead to FEMA, just like all public health roads don't have to lead to the CDC. So, and also when you're searching
Your
for
cert
different,
too, right? Like
Yep,
join
that's-
your participate, train up to be work on your local cert. Community emergency response team that's run by generally your local city or county. FEMA's a tough nut to work at too. So I don't know that all roads should lead to FEMA. Keeping a really open mind can lead you down some interesting paths.
very true.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also interesting how many, like I was telling somebody, if you're interested in, like, I had seen a job posting for a casino. It was an emergency manager at a casino. It's like, if you're interested in like something like that and you're interested in emergency management, that's perfect. If you like sports, they've got emergency managers, airlines. So anything that you're interested in and emergency management, there's probably a connection there somewhere.
JD, interestingly enough, the NDAA, or the Coast Guard Auth Act, included a line that we have to build a software system that will give local people a way to respond during a vessel crisis or a missing person crisis. I don't know exactly how it's supposed to work. I don't know very much about it, but there's a line in there. So apparently the Coast Guard is going to be funding this thing, or Congress is going to be funding this thing. It will need an app and a website in order to make all of this work. I don't know how we get there. It's the R&D piece that I'm not greatly involved in, but there's so many different ways to get involved in some of this that don't involve going straight to the national organizations. The state level, you get so much more experience, get to do more, be much more hands-on.
Do you integrate those VHS S&T at all? I think some of their science folks, I think, are innovating quite a bit in their workspace, and maybe those five really sort of a partner that a good partner that we
I didn't.
You broke up a little bit. Were you talking about DHS S&T? Yeah, I know that, like, I know Coast Guard works with them as well as our R&D center. So, but yeah, they've been posting some pretty interesting stuff that they're doing in this world too.
Yeah, they're amazing. That's a comms job I would think would be super fun. Their lead comms person has been there for decades. He's a legend. But yeah, that would be a really cool job to have. So I'm available. Jen, please feel free to share my LinkedIn information and my Gmail with everybody. And I'll send you some suggestions for CEDAR contacts.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And I will also share the communication guide that you sent to me.
Please. Yeah. I think that we could build an entire course around that, to be honest.
We have talked about that. I believe Penn State probably has one. Penn State's kind of got a lot of everything, as you know, as your dad knows.
Yeah. Hi, Dad.
Well, thank you again so much for coming and speaking tonight. I know that this has been a crazy time for you. So the fact that you took an hour plus during such a crazy time means a lot. And I know that from the chat, it sounds like a lot of people got a lot out of your, especially the USA jobs information. So
Good.
I do appreciate your time.
Good. Glad to come talk to the club about everything and show good examples of resumes and bad examples. Like, yeah, glad to help with that.
Oh, we
And-
might take you up on that then. Here you go,
Yeah,
JD. That's
We might have you
speaker
come
for
talk to the student chapter, exactly.
JD, that's an actual offer. I figured that you would take it that way.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
I will be reaching out to you very soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Give me a week or two first. When you
Sure,
see
sure, of course.
some of the
of
news
course.
next week, you'll understand.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm glad to help.
I'm gonna be watching the news like a hawk now. I'm curious
Indeed.
what's coming down the pike.
Hopefully it's not exciting. That's what we're doing this week. So nothing will be exciting. So hopefully we won't hear anything. It'll be great.
Good. Then I will watch it, and when I don't see anything, I will say, "Great job, Christie."
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. It was great to join
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye.
night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.